afternoon, good evening, good metal. My name's Coop and welcome to the Spoken Metal Show. Today's episode is with Joseph Mortimer. After being suggested by listener Craig that we should check out Joe's sort of work and the bands he's in, I knew a little bit about some of the bands that Joe had been in and is currently in, but maybe nowhere near as much as I'd like to. So we kind of really deep dived and went a lovely stroll down memory lane of the Liverpool metal scene around that time, the late 90s into 2000 and beyond. Some fascinating sort of insights there. Joseph is really eloquently speaks about metal. Has really interesting perspective on it as well. We'll definitely get him on again. We didn't even touch on. We touched on a little bit about the UK Slamfest and kind of events that he's involved in. But there's a whole lot of other episode there. We could have gone on for ages. This was one of the longest ones, close to 2 hours and above. But we talked about the band he's in now, Colpocleisis, Crepitation. And all the bands that he's been in as well before Cancerous Womb, Neuroma, Sadistic Under Torture, and he playing bass in kind of Corrupt Moral Altar, Exhumation, Ogun, all this kind of. The guy's done so much great stuff and so constantly bringing out new bits and pieces and a real defender of the faith. I told him this on the podcast as well. Real defender of the faith and. It's really kind of positive outlook about when we come out of this pandemic and coronavirus lockdown, what it's going to look like afterwards as well. We talk a little bit about that. Really nice conversation. I hope you enjoy it. This is with Joseph Mortimer. So Joe Mortimer finally on the show, and a lot of people suggested that I speak to Joe about the scene, about kind of things he was involved with. And so I tracked Joe down. It wasn't hard because he's involved and he's friends with lots of friends that I'm with as well, because he's hosted a ton of events and been in a ton of bands. In fact, looking at it, Joe, are you in every single extreme metal band that's ever existed?
I'm pretty sure I have been at one point.
I have. It's a fair old list of like Cancerous Womb and Crepitation, some great bands there. So we get the chance to sit down with Joe Mortimer. Thanks for coming on the show, Joe. I really appreciate it.
No problem. It's a pleasure. It's good to come on and speak to people about everything I've been involved in and just me, really.
Yeah, and some fascinating stuff, and I suppose let's start as I always do and try and start at roughly the beginning. Do you remember your first introduction to music, and maybe not even music of an extreme nature, but just music itself?
I would. Funnily enough, I'd say that my introduction to music was probably actually quite extreme. Okay. I wasn't really brought up in a household which had a lot of music. I don't remember it, but I was always told that my mum was playing the likes of Meatloaf and like Guns N' Roses, but I don't really recall any of that. The first kind of memory of music, I guess, was, and at the time I didn't know who it was. I discovered years later, but at the age of 8, was actually listening to Celtic Frost.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And that would be because my brother brought me for my 8th birthday. Bought me back in 1994. Bought some manga videos for me because it's something he was interested in himself, and I used to watch with him. So he bought me some manga Gaiba VHS videos. And back in the mid 90s, manga used to use The Heart Beneath by Celtic Frost as a music, like you sampled that as a part of the advertisement campaign.
Yeah,
and so that was my first kind of.
That's interesting. Occasion. I think a lot of people say video games and the mum and dad's record collection, but you came from like listening to being the background of like manga and stuff and anime. That's interesting. And I think Celtic Frost they are underrated. Celtic Frost, right? I mean, I know a lot of people who like them, but they don't seem to come up as much as you'd think for people's influences. They're hugely experimental as well, to a certain greater or lesser degree, Celtic Frost. But it's just, I don't know, they kind of seem to always get forgotten when people talk about important bands along the structure of getting to extreme sort of metal and stuff. I just think it's interesting that they kind of fell by the wayside. It's strange, Celtic Frost, like.
Yeah, they're one of those strange bands that every band that people listen to would probably cite as a huge influence, but they themselves don't necessarily come up as a band that people refer to as as influential, other than maybe in like the older generations of people who were like listening to like into the Pandemonium and stuff back in the day when those earlier records were first coming out. they certainly didn't. I think they're one of those bands who got more popular after they declined in popularity in a weird kind of twist of fate way that people kind of realised their older material was such a big influence on.
They had that wonderful thing though of kind of almost not totally, but changing their sound from album to album. They could really kind of stuff. They really, let's say experimental, but they were. And I think like as they kind of moved to the sort of late to middle 90s, I think they were doing some great ones. That's probably where the height of the popularity lay. Like, so you were listening to them. Did you kind of offshoot from that? It's like, okay, these bands tour with this band, or did you kind of? How did you get into the other bands then? How did that kind of spider out?
Well, as I say, like they were the first bands that I recall hearing, but I didn't actually find out it was them for a very long time. Yeah. I actually didn't find out until I had my first smartphone, where I had like an app where you can record a sample of music and it'll tell you who it is.
Sure. Yeah.
So years and years later, with a whole kind of musical journey in between, I was like, I wonder what band that was. And I scanned it and I was like, oh my God, that was Celtic Frost. Like, I never knew, because it was never a band that I grappled with loads at the time when I was in my late teen years, early 20s. But then it kind of made me think, oh wow, that's actually a band that like probably the first band that I ever heard as far as like heavy music is.
It's interesting that you say that. You like only later found out who it was, and then obviously you could look at the back catalogue and whatever. But so in the first inception, it was just the noise. It was the sounds that were going on, the heavier sound, the heavier guitar, the heavier sort of whole mentality. That was something that kind of like lit a fire under you, like kind of sparked. You were like, I don't know what this is, but I really like it. Was it more of that type of thing? Yeah.
It was the kind of vibe. It was the kind of, at the time I really enjoyed the kind of sequencing that it had with the imagery, and which is what kind of got me into how I started really with music to kind of carry on that story. When I was about the same time, actually no, a few years later when I was in high school, me and my high school best mate Glenn started. We met together in high school and we were both into anime and manga, and we found a website which had loads of like cutscenes from anime, from like fight scenes, which had metal songs in the background.
Yeah.
And we're like sequenced in time with the metal songs. So we were kind of like getting exposed to all of this heavy music through this imagery and these kind of violent fight scenes. So the music kind of represented it. And at the time, it was while nu metal was probably in its like kind of second wave of like Deftones and Korn and Slipknot and all those kind of bands. So those were featuring with all of this footage back in 1998 through to 2000, and we were watching all of these videos, which was really getting us into heavier music, rock music and stuff, where especially in the part of Liverpool that we were both coming up in, it was, very rare that you really came across anybody who was in our age who was into that kind of music. So we were just enjoying it ourselves. Yeah. And also at that time, there was also the rise of the likes of South Park and Jackass, which had like hard rock soundtracks, and we used to watch MTV, which had like Beavis and Butthead, Celebrity Deathmatch. So there was all kinds of joke violence, real violence, all kinds of music that was kind of being associated with it, as well as being brought up in Bootle, which was quite a rough area of Liverpool.
Sure.
So we kind of associated everything that we were experiencing day to day with the stuff that we were interested visually, which was accompanied by all of this heavy music. So it kind of all just worked. It just made sense to us. Everything that we would listen to would match the imagery, and it matched the kind of discussions that we were having just as teenagers.
Was you able then to kind of, were you able to deep dive on anything? Were you able to kind of go and start fishing for stuff, if you will? So you'd watch stuff, you'd see like South Park, or you'd watch like a Celebrity Deathmatch, and they'd use like a sample out of Slayer, or they'd use something like that. Were you able to kind of then go out and start trying finding this music as well, separately from watching it and kind of seeing it on, Raw Power and Noisy Mothers and that type of thing?
Yeah, so we'd go online whenever we could. Like at the time, Glenn had a computer and I didn't, and we were going on searching for similar artists. And when we got our first couple of CDs, and we'd would listen to a popular CD like for early Deftones, listening to like Adrenaline around a fair, and we'd look at all the bands the bands that we enjoyed used to thank in their thanks list.
Right, yeah, in the thank you section at the back, yeah, where they'd go like thank the mum and dad and stuff, and they'd thank the bands that they'd been out with, like yeah.
So the way I kind of approached it, if I found a band that I'd like, I wouldn't necessarily buy the album that had the songs on that I liked by them. I'd buy their first album,
right,
and then I'd read the thanks list, and I'd be like, right, who are the bands that these bands used to play with, used to grow up with, used to started out with, who were friends with, and then I'd try and buy those CDs by those bands. Yeah. So, if you look at the Slipknot self-titled album in the thanks list, there's loads of like death metal bands and stuff. So it was just like, who are these bands? So then I'd go and explore.
And you go deep dive, yeah.
Yeah, so then, especially with the use of Last FM, which was one of the earliest kind of...
I remember that, yeah.
It's like a social media platform, which purely just kind of records what music you listen to and gives you suggestions for other artists. So when I was, the first time I ever heard Napalm Death was on a Kerrang Covermount CD called High Times, I think maybe back in 2000.
I know the one,
2001 or something.
Yeah.
And it had like loads of skate punk tunes on it and stuff. So I was like Blink-182, Phoenix TX, all the kind of bands that I got into through the movies out at the time, like American Pie. Then this track on it, which was Napalm Death, and me and Glenn were like, "Whoa, what the hell is this?"
It stands out from everything else so much.
It was just like this was ferocious. This was just insane. It was almost funny to us because of how heavy it was. We couldn't really comprehend it. But then Glenn got a bunch of Napalm Death CDs for his birthday that year because he'd asked for them. And then we were looking through all of the bands who were referred to in those albums. Last FM was linking us to bands like Pig Destroyer, and we were like, "Whoa!" Like this. When you think you know everything there is to know, you suddenly realise you don't know anything because for every band that you discover, there's another 10 bands, 20 bands, 30 bands linked to that band. So then it just keeps on. It's like it's just a wave effect. You find
a lot of times. A lot of times, especially with extreme music, we only remember kind of the people that got to the top of the mountain, the people that kind of broke through and crossed over. We don't think of somehow the work that goes on before it's bands that are kind of like building up to that. There was this wonderful cauldron of stuff going on around 2000, the early 2000s, sort of when the internet really exploded. You could totally you could put on Spotify and find any artist and look for everything. And Last FM was kind of drip feeding sort of bands to you, but there was loads of like compilation CDs and everything, like you say, that was like had skate videos and stuff like that on. Had everything. It had like ska, it had like pop punk, it had death metal, and it was all thrown in together because it was just all kind of music at the fringes of society, if you will. Like, so I remember listening to like Fudge Tunnel and stuff at that age, at that sort of time, and they were kind of another example of a band that were like did the work. But other bands kind of took it and kind of got more famous off the back of it. We forget these bands, don't we? We forget things like Pig Destroyer and kind of just how important they are and kind of the makeup of where we got to. A lot of people on the show cite Cannibal Corpse as being one of those moments where they go from, I thought I knew fucking everything about the music I was into, but then I hear this and it just fucking takes me another step forward. Was the main motivation for you listening to stuff was go, how more extreme does it get? Was it kind of a bigger, faster, harder type of attitude there?
Yeah, kind of. It was strange that every band that I listened to, I just thought, this band's killer, this band's heavy, like I'm into this. I'd always drift to the heavier end of the album as well.
Right.
So when I was getting into Deftones, for example, the first track I heard by them was Head Up, which was on Around the Fair and had Max Cavalera doing guest vocals. And I was like, who's this guest vocalist? So then that got me into Sepultura. And I was just like,
whoa. Like Nail Bomb and stuff, and then you're away on
yeah. And then obviously through all that can lead me to Fudge Tunnel as well.
Yeah.
So it's all connected in through one way. So every band that I was into, every band that I was enjoying, I when I was like around that age, I used to really enjoy whenever I was drawing or painting or anything in school, it was always kind of like landscapes, seascapes, and always kind of dark colours, always kind of moody kind of feeling. So I always used to kind of imagine the music with the imagery. Yeah. So I always kind of visualised the heavier songs on the albums that I was listening to with heavier darker, moodier looking soundscapes. So I remember I bought, like I'm sure a lot of people would laugh, but I bought the album Break the Cycle by Stained when that first came out because I've seen it. And I seen it in Music Zone in Bootle New Strand, and I bought it before I'd even heard anything because I really enjoyed the artwork.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed the album. And then, but they had some really heavier songs on the album.
Well, yeah, Mike Mushock, the guitar player, he was the first kind of metal guy I really kind of listened to. That was really fucking around with tunings and different things and baritone guitars and all kinds of stuff. Anybody who hasn't heard that album, a lot of people will say Stained and they'll think of all the hits and all that stuff and the videos. But it was a very dark, especially that album, certainly with the imagery, it was incredibly dark and kind of like, you know, really plumbing the depths of kind of dark mentalities and kind of imagery and stuff. People forget that. Do you think they see them more as a pop act because of the whole Limp Bizkit thing when they kind of friends with them? It's interesting.
Yeah.
I didn't consider that. I listened to the album for the same reason. Yeah.
Like whenever I mention the band, people I always suggest to listen to Dysfunction, the previous album, because I think that would add even heavier moments, like really like neck breaking riffs.
Yeah.
So I kind of whatever band that I actually was into at the time, I always drifted towards the heavier end of what they were doing. I remember like when I started picking up magazines like Kerrang, Rock Sound, Metal Hammer, Terrorizer, and like listen, like that was a big kind of opened up a world of music to me because of the cover mount CDs. So I went through a long period at that time, but because it was very popular, I listened to a lot of the post-hardcore, like pop punk, but largely because of the Tony Hawk's games. So like the original Tony Hawk's, which came out in the late 90s, had everything from Suicidal Tendencies to Refused to Anthrax and all kinds of bands on. Like you mentioned earlier, there was a mixture of like pop punk, a mixture of ska with bits of like less
a lot of crossover stuff, like Tendencies and stuff. We're mixing kind of like rap and infectious grooves type of things together. And a lot of people cite Tony Hawk's like that's getting remade now. The soundtrack's gonna have to be killer for that, like, you know, it's gonna have to get all loads of like bands back together and kind of mix bands up and stuff. But a lot of people cite Tony Hawk's as being the kind of the way of getting into bands that the people hadn't heard of and stuff. So when you're taking this music in, are you just buying CDs then, or how often are you doing it? Because we're not at a point yet we can buy a lot of stuff or download a lot of stuff online yet, are we?
Yeah, I was never really online when I was younger. I never really, I had a computer at home, but it was mostly for like a couple of games and schoolwork and stuff. But I never really had internet access, so I never really had that ability. I could, for a short while, I had Sky and cable access, so I could watch like the music channels. But mostly, there was like one pivotal moment actually. Going back to Glenn, he gave me I gave him a blank video cassette, which he put in to record from Kerrang from when we left to go to school until we got home. And then I've still got that video now. I've still got that video now, so it must be from 1999 maybe. And like then I could then go home and watch all of these music videos for these bands that I'd never heard of. So that was another big thing for me, just to kind of listening to music. When I was in college, that was like when I first started being able to earn money and buy my own music. I'd leave Hubert College in Bootle. I'd go down to Music Zone in Bootle New Strand, and I'd be picking up whatever I could, because Music Zone was a really good source of new music and older music as well for quite reasonable price. So I'd get my EMA and I'd go down there and pick whatever up, whether it was a band that I'd heard before, a band I'd recently heard on a cover mount CD, or just because I like the album artwork, or somebody had mentioned a name, or I'd read the name in a thanks list somewhere. I'd be like, oh, it's like I bought an album by Discharge purely because I had another album by Anthrax where they'd covered Protest and Survive by Discharge. I was like, I'm going to go and buy this Discharge CD because it must be awesome if Anthrax are going to cover them. So that was my...
That whole infrastructure of cover mount CDs and magazines kind of telling you about bands coming out and stuff like that, and the artwork being as a point of reference to kind of get to where your next band's going to be and discover new bands. That whole infrastructure's gone now, hasn't it? Essentially, it's moved on. We're a whole different thing now, and there was a beauty to that. There was something a little bit more. It added validity and weight, I think. So if you went to buy a CD, say you went to buy a Discharge CD, you would, even if you didn't like it the first pass, because you had the CD, you would just listen to it relentlessly until you fucking liked it. Or you went through.
It's funny you say that, because I actually said almost that exact phrase to somebody the other day. That you buy a CD or you get a CD like off your family for Christmas or your birthday or something, and you listen to it. And this day and age, you might listen to something going, "Nah, it's not gonna be that." But back then, you'd be like, "Yeah, that's it." It's like, "Well, I'll sell it or I'll give it away." But back then, it was like, "No, I've paid like a lot of money for of what I have, and so I'm gonna listen to it until I like it or I find something that I like about it." Yeah,
because like now you would listen to like on Spotify or whatever streaming service you've got, and people will do this. People go, "Oh, I don't like Slayer," and you go, "Okay, if you listen to them, I heard a song once," and that's enough to them for not listening to an artist. It's like, you fucking crazy that you go, you're assuming by 2 or 3 tracks you've assumed the entire body of work of an artist. Like when a person I know who's not into metal, and we were talking about Metallica as being a touchstone, as they might know that because it's very famous, and they were like, "Oh, I'm not really keen on Metallica," like, and I was like, what have you heard just out of interest? And they named about 2 or 3 songs that come up on Spotify that were like pretty deep cuts off albums like Call of Cthulhu and stuff like, and I was like, that's not the Metallica I would say would suggest going to getting into them. And people forget this, that sometimes you need to be lubed up to a band before you fucking get all the deep cuts and the experimental stuff. You need to kind of hear their more accessible tracks where you go, okay, let's go, okay, that's a more accessible track. From that now I can start going into the catalogue a little bit more in depth. We've lost, I think, all of that kind of willingness to listen.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have just lost the ability and the actual art of listening. Like, people don't really know what they listen to or what they're listening for anymore. Yeah. Like, it was almost an art form to actually listen to something, to hear what the artist wanted to get across. It's something which I think has just changed over the generations, changed over the years. But as you say, you don't really get people who spend much time on it. They'll hear, like, if you play somebody who's not really into metal, something like Slayer, they'll be like, "Oh," it's kind of like the whole, "Oh, it's just screaming" kind of thing. It's like, well, what do you think of the musicality of it? What do you think of the messages behind it? What do you think about the art where, you can, and the next step beyond that is like, "Oh, well, I appreciate the really good musicians, but it's not for me." And I was like, well, that's fair enough. But a lot of people kind of, are very reductive in their analysis of what music can be.
Yeah, I mean, look, you're allowed to not like acts and stuff. That's not that I'm kind of any kind of gatekeeper to say what you're not allowed to. But you can listen to something, but at least give them a chance. You know what I mean? It's like, you can't listen to one song by an artist and suddenly go, "I'm not into them." You just can't do that, And I think that a lot of people have maybe don't get into the heavier sides and more extreme sides of music because they think it sounds one way and they don't know the thought process that's gone into making it. So they're like, well, it's not for me. And they're missing out on a huge wealth. Like, Cannibal Corpse comes up a lot, but are often kind of put against, like, obviously it's crazy imagery, it's hyper violent and that type of thing, and very kind of incendiary album and titles of songs and stuff. But the musicianship and what's going on in there is superb, and there's some really interesting stuff going on, removed from that. And so I think it probably puts a lot of people off the more extreme end of music. But in your case, it sounds like you became almost like something of a librarian to it, where you were like, okay, who did they listen to? Who did they go out and tour with? Who were their influences? And you really kind of fell down the rabbit hole, so to speak, with artists.
That's quite funny that you use that term, because that's kind of how I describe, like, most things that I'm into. Like, some of my friends have kind of described me as like a bit of a, walking like dictionary or encyclopedia of metal bands and stuff. And I don't think I know that much, but it's probably because I know a lot that I don't think I know much at all, if that makes sense.
I know
Like,
that makes total sense. Yeah.
like because I've looked into some things. Like I'll be like today, for example, I was sitting like me and my girlfriend are currently working from home, and there was a song came on to just the Spotify playlist, and I was like, oh, did you know about this song? You know, the reason why they wrote this was because they were influenced by this, and she was just like, how do you know this?
How do you,
like,
where do you keep this in your mind? Yeah.
Like why do you know this? It's like again, to just go back to Stained, there was a song called Waste, and which came on my Spotify the other day while we were working. I was like, oh, this has actually got a really sad story behind it, and told the story, and she was just like, and I was like, and I looked at her, and before she even said it, I was like, why do I know this?
Yeah.
And it's just
at your store. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just things which, you know, when I was, especially more so when I was younger, when I'd buy a CD and I'd analyze everything about the CD, and then I'd read all the magazines and read everything which I could about an artist that I was interested in, because I wanted to know. I genuinely wanted to know what an artist was about, what their influence was, what the songs were about.
Are we maybe kind of get to a point with the way people are listening and taking in music now in a streaming platform and that type of thing? And this gets raised a lot on the show. It's interesting you talk about how to listen to a band, the art of listening. It's definitely changed. I would say it's almost been weakened now. We've almost taught people to listen to 30, 60 seconds of a song and judge that song, to listen to songs away from an album separately when sometimes they're meant to be contextual, even part of a progressive sort of whole storyline. And we're teaching people to kind of almost, it feels like we're dumbing down our listening habits by the way we are, by giving people the option to just skip through stuff and skip through tracks on an album and go from one decade to the next and that type of thing, and selectively pull from someone's catalogue rather than kind of listening almost like you say as the artist intended. It feels like we may have dumbed down our listening skills as well with the kind of last sort of 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, I'd agree. Like if you go back into the history of music, if you go back to like the 60s and 70s, when there was a huge shift away from music being about singles to music being about albums. So bands like the Beatles and Pink Floyd were like pioneering when it came to like making albums and not just a CD or a tape or a vinyl with a collection of songs on it. Excuse me. When things became more about an actual album. So you could even go as far as back as say Bitches Brew by Miles Davis as something which could be hugely influential because it was so different. But there was so much more focus on what the album stood for. But I think we've almost kind of gone backwards a little bit now, where it's gone back to singles and music videos, and then there's so many bands and artists and musicians these days which kind of fall into the one-hit wonder kind of thing, I guess, where they'll have a song or a music which is super popular and then nobody ever hear it. They can release an album which might do okay, but people don't know anything about it because they only listen to that song. They never really listen to the album. They never listen to anything else the artist's done. So artists become so much more of a consumer product. Music is very much a consumed product these days as opposed to something which people enjoy. I think of myself as a music fan more than I'd say represent myself as a metalhead. Like people would look at me and say, "Oh, what long hair, beard, metal t-shirt? He's definitely a metalhead." But I maybe that's how I look on the outside. But I'd say that I'm more of just a music fan, somebody who enjoys music, not just enjoys songs. So that's why I've always.
That's just something that gets. Why is it that only gets levelled as at the metal fraternity? Is that, you know, if you're a metalhead or, you know, maybe a punk probably gets a little bit of this as well, that somehow you cannot listen to anything else. That just seems crazy. Whereas every other facet of music, like pop, you can listen to whatever you like. Rock, you can listen to whatever. But something about metal, people immediately close everything, all the fences around you, and go, well, you can't listen to, you don't like, you mustn't like Pink Floyd then because they're not metal. It's like, no. It's still great music. It's still powerful music. Why wouldn't they do that? And with this comes up a lot as well on the show. In listening to that, you can take that and bring it into metal and enrich metal. All of the best sort of metal albums have took things from the blues or things from punk or things from classical music, and it took all those things and just enriched metal. It seems crazy that we get labelled as metalheads as being, well, you only listen to that. It's like, no, I can enjoy British Brew. I talked about British Brew on a previous show about how I listen to that, I don't know, maybe once or twice a year, not too often, every couple of months, and I still don't understand it. I still don't get it. It's too complex for me, but I know it's important, and I know it's great. I know it's important. And every so often when I listen to it, I get a little bit further with it when I'm like, okay, I think I know what's going on here. Musically, from a notes point of view, I know it's intelligent, but I never really kind of complete the journey with it. I just think it's interesting as metalheads, we get pigeonholed as being only that type of music, and that's it. It's crazy, that, isn't it?
Yeah, it's one of those that I think a lot of people look at it as so incredibly like impenetrable. Like, you'll see, you'll meet somebody, just anybody, any occasion. You'll be like, "Oh, so what kind of music are you into?" And they'll be like, "Oh, a little bit of everything except metal." A lot of people will find it as so kind of like, the normal answers are like, "Oh, I listen to a little bit of everything except metal and opera." Yeah. they're the two answers that people get, because people.
It seems like the only way metal sometimes gets through sometimes is when it's so good, or the implication from it is so powerful it cannot be ignored. So something like the Ace of Spades, like Motorhead's Ace of Spades, is a staple rock song, many would argue, and straddling metal to a certain degree. But because of its message and it's so powerful, it just cuts through into the zeitgeist. It just becomes a thing. I was talking on another episode about the theme of the Lucasade ad was Phantom of the Opera by Maiden, and that's pure metal. That's a pure metal, but everybody recognised it because it come through the what's the word? The kind of the way it was meant to be listened to and the way it was meant to be inferred is so it's just good. It just comes through. Some might say that that's the point when a band sells out, and that's the argument gets put at a metal band that sells out. So when it does become, for lack of a better word, palatable for an audience, is when a band kind of like, everybody knows Paranoid by Black Sabbath, and that's famous and that charted in the singles chart, but Sabbath hadn't sold out. It's interesting, isn't it? There's a whole wealth of stuff we could go into there. Like, so let's kind of pull it back slightly. So when you're taking these bands in, you're going out and you're buying CDs and you're kind of looking through and figuring out what's going on. Was there a particular band that really sort of made sense to you? You really kind of zoned in. You're like, these are doing everything I'm hearing by them's great, and everything they're doing I really enjoy.
I'd say probably Deftones actually were the first band that I ever really got obsessed over. And the reason why, to take it back to when I mentioned Head Up off Around the Fair, that was such a big song for me. It really kind of opened up a lot of music to me. But I didn't know what the name of the song was. I actually just knew it was by Deftones because that's all the information that was on the video. So I ended up having to buy every album that I could find by Deftones until I found the one with that on. So they had three commercially released albums at the time, and of course that song was on the last album I bought by them. Of course it is. So that's by all three, and by that point I had more albums by them than I had by any other band. I had a lot of information. They just released White Pony, which went absolutely supernova for them. So like that kind of just massively opened my world. Like the heaviness, the kind of street kind of vibes that they had, the kind of rap crossover stuff they had on Adrenaline, through to the kind of spacey, kind of trippy vibes and White Pony.
Stephen Carpenter brought all that kind of like noise core stuff as well into it as well, and the interesting sort of abstract ideas, which really kind of lovely bracketed the heavy ideas and the more simpler riffs. And they had these like wild sort of excursions where they would do these sort of lovely echo stuff and everything. I remember seeing Stephen Carpenter a few times and being amazed at how he could straddle both. He could play, straight down the middle and kind of really heavy cut up stuff, and then do this lovely sort of choral stuff as well. I thought it was fantastic. A real complete player. I don't think Stephen Carpenter gets the credit he deserves for being that real sort of complete player. And maybe by extension Chino as well, because of like, the wonderful switching he could do within song and the desperation stuff, like, like Drive and stuff like that, and Shove and Drive. That type of thing was really difficult to pull off. I found as a musician where you could do both. You could do the ups and the downs and create these wonderful valleys and peaks within the songs. And I don't think maybe to the uninitiated, Deftones get as much respect as they deserve for doing that. And that's a great band to kind of be the first band that opens doors for you, because they cover a lot of musical ground, don't they?
Yeah, definitely. Like the kind of bands that they cite interest in is everybody from the likes of Maiden and Metallica through to like these days they mention stuff like Dillinger Escape Plan and Converge as being influences on them, especially just because of the variance of sound, especially with the more recent Deftones albums like Gore, which have got almost a sound which is synonymous with the likes of like genty bands, tech metal bands and proggy bands and stuff. Even the occasional Meshuggah moment. You know, so they get a lot of influence, a lot of sound, and they deliver it. They're capable of taking it all in, delivering it, but always keeping their own sound as well.
Yeah. I'm moving it forward on each album to be keeping interesting. Like the difference from Around the Fair to White Pony is pretty big, but it's still the same band, right? And as you move forward and to go to Gore, it's still the same band, even though the makeup of each of those albums is radically different, and the approach is radically different. It's still the same band creatively moving through. So at this point, have you picked up an instrument at this point? Are you trying to recreate these sounds that you're hearing or learn these songs?
So I had picked up an instrument, but it wasn't a guitar or a bass or anything. It was actually I'd started playing saxophone through high school. It was more of an excuse to hang around with my friends, really, because I had some friends in high school who were in like the school orchestra and stuff. So I went along and asked if there was any instruments they needed in the orchestra, and the music teacher in high school said, "Oh yeah, we've got a place for the alto saxophone." So I got one of them through school and started playing. So that was kind of my first excursion into playing music, learning things about music, learning to read and write music.
Right, because that's interesting. You're listening to one style of music and you're enjoying that, but then there's no saxophone for the most part on a lot of these records. Where are you listening to learn the saxophone then? What are you listening there?
So I don't know really. Like I'd never really listened at that time to any kind of jazz or any kind of classical music, but through playing in the orchestra, it kind of introduced me to the likes of Glenn Miller, and then so I started to enjoy like listening to jazz, listening to blues, and I was trying to get all of the sheet music that I could get a hold of from the department to try and play things.
Right.
And so it just kind of opened me up to musicality. So
you there's not that many, like when you're learning guitar or bass or drums to a certain extent. There's some quick routes to doing that, like guitar tablature or tablature itself is an easier way that if you don't want to learn sight reading, you can learn to play a piece of music. But with the saxophone, it's my understanding, I wouldn't claim to be a saxophonist of any kind, but it's my understanding that there's no real easy books for that. It's a case of you have to learn to read music. You have to learn to sight read to play that instrument properly. So you almost kind of force yourself to do that. Were you self-taught, or was there a teacher who would help you work out kind of what these pictures and what these sorts of diagrams meant on the stave? Did someone walk you through that, or did you learn yourself?
So I was able to get hold of some music theory books from Dawson's back in the day. So I could kind of the earlier saxophone books would kind of teach me where to put my fingers. But there's a lot of I had a high school music teacher, like a saxophone one-to-one teacher as part of GCSE music, which would help me kind of understand how to actually play. So with the saxophone, you've got a very specific embouchure, it's called. It's how you hold your mouth around the reed and the mouthpiece to actually make the sound that you want it to do. You can't just put it in your mouth and blow, because it'll probably just squeak back at you.
Yeah.
So I had to learn about how to hold that, how to breathe properly, how to when to rest. And so I just used books that I got through school and books that I was able to pick up from Dawson's in town and Curly's and stuff, so I could get just to learn kind of general songs. So they all have like regular pop songs and very simple kind of root notes for how to play them on saxophone. So it wasn't necessarily saxophone songs, it was just playing popular songs like the Titanic theme tune and stuff like
Yeah,
that on
you picked the root
saxophone.
notes out to follow it along. Yeah. So when you're listening to this as well, that's it. It reminds me of when Zappa was first, listening to music. He was listening to blues first, but he also liked Stravinsky, and he'd listen to 3 Hours Past Midnight, a blues song, and then he would listen to Stravinsky and things like ionization and stuff like that. And it was that clashing of the two that kind of ultimately gave us Frank Zappa, and that kind of that way he went. It seems to me that that part of you and the learning is something that you can help you fold back if you start to pick up the bass as well. So when did the other instruments come into play?
So very towards the end of high school, so when I was doing my GCSEs, I had a friend who was playing guitar. He used to play like Green Day and Blink-182 tracks and stuff like that. And there was a spare bass which I used to just kind of try. He used to try and tell me where to put my fingers and stuff, just so I could play along with him. I didn't think much of it at the time, but I thought I'd just play along with him so he's got like an accompanist to go along. But when I got my first bass and really started playing bass when I went to college. So when I left high school, I went to Cuba College and I actually started doing A-levels in maths, physics, business studies and IT computing. I did that for 1 year and then dropped all of them because I had a friend, it wasn't even a friend, it was just somebody I knew from my high school who went to that college who was telling me about a music tech course they were doing. And I was like, for whatever reason at the time, it just made full sense for me I think I'd lost interest with kind of foundational core subjects like maths and science, and I didn't really have an idea of where I was going, so I kind of just switched to music because that's something I was really interested in, really enjoyed, and decided to drop all of those. So I finished the first year, got an AS levels in all of them, and then decided to move through to music technology. So I started doing a BTEC in music technology, and on that course I met a guy called Tom. Not somebody I really speak to these days. Still got him on social media, but I bought my first bass from him as a vintage 4-string. Bought it off him for 80 quid, I think. Yeah. He was a really good bassist. He was he really knew what he was doing. I bought a bass off him just because I was enjoying the idea of playing more with actual instruments. Trying to learn to play something that was akin to the music that I was listening to.
Right. Yeah.
So that was back in 2003 when I first bought my first bass from him and started really getting into playing music more.
Did you find that some of the stuff that you'd learnt on the sax you could bring over? Because your ear was probably pretty well tuned at this point, wasn't it? With the stuff you were doing, the sax and root note stuff and that sort of thing, you were pretty kind of savvy to maybe sort of notes and scales and stuff. You could probably hear them or had a pretty good sort of start in ear training. And then, would you be able to sight read and stuff to a greater or lesser degree? Did that help starting the bass? Was it instead of starting at ground zero and moving up? The stuff that you learned from a saxophone point of view and the things you were learning there, was it transferable, those skills, over to the bass, or were you starting at absolute zero and moving forward that way?
So in some ways it did help. It helped me just have a bit of a musical understanding, so I knew what was going on. I knew musical staves and score. I knew how to read and write, so if somebody gave me music I could figure out. It did take me a long time to actually transfer the ability to read sheet music and then play that on bass. When I never had any kind of lessons on bass. I did just pick it up and just play on my own, at least for, when was it? So from 2003 to 2009, when I started in university, where I got some bass lessons in university. While I was studying music at that level as well. So yeah.
I'd put it forward, Joe. Definitely, your ear was probably a lot better tuned than most musicians when they first pick up that instrument because of the work you'd done. I think that was probably definitely something you'd have benefited from having.
So I agree.
Did you, at this point, were you going to see bands in a live context, or when did you start sort of going out and actually seeing some of the bands that you might have listened to?
So it was the first ever show I went to was December 2002,
Right.
where some of my friends at the time, and some people I'm actually still very good friends with now, they got tickets to go and see Disturbed in Manchester.
Okay. Yeah.
So we went to see Disturbed as our first ever kind of live music, like proper rock show. Really, it was Disturbed with a band from Sweden called Blindside supporting. And in fact, the opening band who didn't turn up to play the show was actually meant to be The Darkness back then. And
okay, that's interesting.
They never had any singles out. I'd never heard of them at the time, and it was only like a couple of years later, and I was just like, no way they were meant to play that first show. So that was my first like show, and it was a big show as well, obviously. Yeah. And then after that very first show, I was hooked. So I'd go to every show that I possibly could. I'd drag my school friends to and my college friends to shows wherever I could. And then shows, the more I found shows, the more shows I found out about. So I'd get flyers at those shows, and I'd go to local shows, and I'd speak to friends to just turn up at like a bar where we knew bands were playing, just to find out more and more. I remember going to shows to see in it was Hannah's Bar in Liverpool city centre, before it was refurbed years ago. And I remember going to like an all-day show upstairs with some college friends, and I never knew any of the bands, and I couldn't even tell you what bands played if I remember. if I look back at it, I just remember we went there just to listen to loads of music. But through college, I got good friends with a guy called Paul Charnock, who's quite well known around Liverpool. He was part of Ogun back in the day, and he was in Scare Tactics for a long time as well.
Scare Tactics as well, yeah.
So I made good friends with him, and I'd known Ogun through a lot of Liverpool shows, just at these little bars that I was going to. The old Picket on Hardman Street, going to all day shows there with other bands like Hollow Point and Obsolete, and bands around that time, which is how I really started making a lot of friends in like the Liverpool metal scene and community. Getting to know all of the bands who were playing around. It was Skeptic Messiah, I remember as well. A few other bands who were making, young people making noise, mostly doing covers of like Marilyn Manson, Alice in Chains, and Metallica, and just like bands that like doing sets, playing all of their covers for the first time. And that was my introduction to like the Liverpool metal scene and the rock scene going on, and to a lot of people who kind of helped develop that for me as well.
It sounds like you had a really kind of voracious appetite for getting to see new music and getting out and to see bands that you hadn't seen before, and kind of just the whole live experience. It seems like you were really kind of fervently looking for that.
Yeah, very much like the earlier years, like I was mentioned just before about like the sights and sounds of the areas I was growing up in, and the sights and sound, the sights of anime, the sights of like Jackass, the sights of and all of these skateboarding videos, and the sounds of the music which came with it. I found that all of this kind of stuff in like to experience on this, in a room with the loud music, with the crowd, with people moshing, with people headbanging, with people just having a good time. Like that was just like addictive. That was like a drug to me. That was like, I need to do more of that. I need to go and see that. I need to go and hear that. And I'd be speaking to everybody I knew about it. I was like, this thing. I'd go to gigs on my own as a mid to late teenager, just because I didn't have a lot of friends who were really into that. I kind of made my own friends at shows. I'd see familiar faces from other shows, and then I'd just get chatting to people.
That's the thing I think that most people don't understand, or some people don't understand. When we talk about live music, and we'll get into this a little bit later, but not having live music or not being able to go to shows and that type of thing, there's the whole element of, yes, it's a show, you pay your tickets, you go watch some bands, you cheer, you enjoy yourself. But there is a vast amount of communal sort of thing that goes on where you meet people of similar interests and talk to them about similar things and find a community. And that's how a scene and a whole community blossoms from there. God knows how many bands have been started by people being collectively together at a show of similar music. I've met my wife at these type of things. people forget that there's an extended thing aside from the music going on at a show.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point, and kind of leads me on in like my whole kind of story of music and me, and links back into another. I was listening to the episode where you interviewed Sal from Whiplash.
Oh yeah, fantastic! Yeah.
So one of the I'd seen flyers for hair shows for a long time, but I'd never got to go to any of them for one reason or other. But I remember going to see Decapitated in the Zanzibar with Dam. It was Decapitated, Garroted, Dam, and Dilacerate. And Dilacerate were a band from Southport.
Right.
So I was just like, wow, a local band, like, that's amazing. So I was like, I went to this gig and I was standing in the queue, and there's this a lad's just started chatting to me. I'd went along with a friend of mine, Geordie, and we were just at the gig in the queue, and then a guy just started chatting to us, and he just started the conversation. He was like, "Oh, you guys here to see Decapitated?" Yeah. We were chatting away and stuff, and at the time, me and Geordie had started trying to put together a bit of a band ourselves with another friend of mine, Arnie, and we were looking for a vocalist, and then we were chatting to this guy, and he was just like, "Oh yeah, so my name's Joe. I've just moved here from Sheffield and go to university in Liverpool. You know, I'm excited. I've just arrived today, I think, or it was the day before, and I'm coming to this gig." So we just started chatting with him, and then he actually became the vocalist for my first ever band. And his name's Joe Stamps, and he's now the vocalist for Hecate Enthroned.
Yeah.
So, which is quite a big name, in the black metal scene, and he's doing really well with those guys. So,
we lost that, or are losing that when we don't have a venue to go to. We don't have a place. You know, if that was live streamed, say that gig, you would have never have met him. You know, exactly. That would have never have happened.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like me and him, we still talk. We still get on really well, and we talk quite often. And we joke about like the fact that, you know, back then, 2004, maybe that was, we were a death metal show in Liverpool for, you know, a huge band that, you know, Decapitated weren't big at the time, but they are now. And we were like, you know, we started our first band together, and now we're in our own respective bands who do well in our scenes. And it's crazy that we just met in a queue because we were the only three people in the queue, and we just started chatting.
That's the story of some of the greatest bands that have ever been, where they've met at a show, but they've gone on to be huge bands, you know, because those people met because of a love of something. So you know, you think of like, you know, Lars and James meeting because of their love of Motorhead and stuff like that. You think of all these people meeting because they were at a place, and that whole sort of kineticism, if you will, of being around people generates that, and that's something that we'll most definitely get into that in a bit. So when you start off kind of writing your own stuff and putting your own sort of band together, when does it translate from you being in the audience to you being on stage?
So the first band that I was ever in, like the band with Joe, Geordie and Arnie, was Sadistic Under Torture, which was just a bunch of people getting together just to try and see what we could do. We didn't really know what genre we were going to be. We just kind of turned up. It's like we turned up on our first practice and we were like, right, what do we do? So we just started making music the best we could. We none of us were really particularly great at our instruments. You know, we all tried really hard, and we all wanted to do like crazy, you know, fast music, and we were just unable to. So we ended up playing something which was vaguely kind of experimentally like blackened death metal, I guess. Okay. And it was a really enjoyable experience, and it kind of gave us our first introduction. The first show we ever played was it was in a venue called the Dresler Lounge on Hardman Street, which was actually it was above a kebab shop, and it was just around the corner from the Picket, where it was, funnily enough, where I used to go a few years earlier when I was first kind of mingling into the Liverpool music scene. So that was our first show. It was through a guy called Sean, who I'm not too sure what he's doing with himself these days. He used to do quite a few shows, I believe, back in the day. But that was our first introduction into playing live. You know, we all had family members there and stuff. So it wasn't necessarily the same kind of show that we would be familiar with these days. You know, but we certainly put our all into it. And we had 4 or 5 songs, and So that was our first taster for as really playing in a band. I think some of the other...
It's interesting that you say about you got in a room, you started kind of playing sounds that you like, and you didn't think of what you were going to be. You were going to be host this, or you were going to be an extreme this, or a black metal version of this, or a death version of this, or a slam. But you weren't thinking of that. You were just thinking of making the noises that you like to hear. And I think that, I put this to you, Joe. I don't think the Deftones, when they first got together, came into a room and said, what we're going to do is we're going to do avant-garde rock metal. I don't think anybody stood there and said that. They let it grow naturally. And I think that's something missing amongst bands that are getting together now, where they immediately first think, what is our brand and what style of music are we going to play? Rather than just simply playing, and the stuff that they play and enjoy comes out, let someone else define that genre.
Yeah, it seems there are a lot of the organic elements of music and bands has really got lost now. You'll find bands who've got social media pages and merch before they've got any recorded material, so people don't even necessarily know what a band sounds like, but you can get a range of their merch already, and they've got a logo before they've even the band have even rehearsed, and it's it doesn't make sense to me how bands do that.
What was it like after that first show? You come off stage, you're sitting kind of, talking to your family and stuff. Was it good? Did you get a good vibe off it? Was it something you were like, I'm still uncomfortable, or, it was awful? Where were you with it?
Oh, we all came off stage and it was electric. It wasn't exactly playing to hundreds of people, as in maybe 25 people, but it was electric.
Music and getting an applause, if you will, even.
Yeah, I think the biggest compliment that we got was the promoter came on stage as soon as we'd finished our set, and I don't remember the exact words he said, but it was something along give it up for the rising stars of the Liverpool metal scene. It was rising stars. This was our first show, and I was like,
that's a nice badge, isn't it? That's a nice moniker to have.
And then as soon as we came off stage, he was like, right, I'm doing this other show. I think at the Hotel California over in Birkenhead. Do you just want to do it? And we were like, yep. And we didn't even think about it. We didn't even ask the date. We just said yeah, and then figured it out afterwards. And we were like, right, we don't really have good gear. We don't know how to get there and stuff. So we figured it out. We we got lifts over there with what gear we had, and we played. And it was just he was really actually quite supportive. He really kind of pushed us, and again, he put us on with some really good bands. The band that I remember the most from that period was they were called Heaven Bleeds at the time, and I'm sure Dan would hate the fact that I'm going to mention that, but they're now called Viscerax, which so they're doing super well. They've they've had several albums out, a few little lineup changes, but they're a really killer grind band. They were due to tour with Wormrot shortly, but obviously that's fell through.
Yeah.
I remember watching those guys. Dan, the guitarist, he had a Napalm Death t-shirt. Back in the day, he used to wear a Napalm Death t-shirt at every single show. And I remember one time at a show where he had a panic because he didn't have one, so he went out and bought one from Quick Liverpool.
Yeah.
So he had to wear that. He does. I don't think he do. He certainly doesn't do it anymore.
I love it. But, would you categorise as the scene of the metal scene around that time as being then particularly sort of strong?
It's kind of hard to say because I didn't really experience so many big shows which had the attendance of public attendance for any shows that I was playing. A lot of the shows were
I should reframe that. I should reframe that slightly. When I say strong, I mean creatively. Was there a lot of people doing a lot of things? Because
yes, definitely.
I remember it being particularly healthy. I remember it being, yes, okay, there was maybe 20, 30 people at a show. But I remember there being lots of bands and quite a few sort of, niches being pushed and sort of some interesting stuff going on,
Yeah, there was a lot of bands, especially in Liverpool. There was the likes of Ogun, Hollow Point, which later on became Scare Tactics. There was Obsolete. There was a lot of bands. There was Diamanthian. There was Dilacerate, who were all the two bands really pushing the heavier end of the game. And all the members of those bands have gone on to form other bands and be members of other bands, the likes of Ethereal. So it was there was a lot of people.
Pretty fertile period, I think, for some of the more extreme metal that was going on. I think it was particularly fertile from what I can remember. Yeah, I remember seeing some stuff.
I reckon a lot of people who were into the music, the best way for them to experience it was by being in bands and playing in bands, and then they could play with other bands and learn more about it. And it was by being in a band, it was almost a vehicle and like a way to learn more about the music scene, to learn more about.
It's often a bit of a curse and a blessing, isn't it, being in a band, because it means, yes, you go to shows and you see bands that you haven't seen before, and you get talking to guitarists if you're a guitarist, and or a bassist or a drummer, and you learn about gear and you improve yourself and lots of things. But there's also the other side of it, is that when you kind of see, when you watch a band, especially if it's a particular instrument that you play, you kind of fixate on that instrument. I find I'm terrible for that. I'm a guitar player, and I can't help when I go to see a band of almost kind of assessing the guitar player, which you shouldn't do. But even worse than that, because I've been tour manager, I kind of see the whole production now, and I always think I wouldn't have put the cabs there, or you know, and it's a curse as much as it's a blessing. So when you're in the first sort of band and you're playing shows, how long does that go for before? How far are we away from, say, Cancerous Womb and stuff? How far are we away from that?
I was quite a few years, I think.
Really?
I don't remember what year it was. I joined Cancerous Womb. It was the late noughties.
Right.
Maybe the early 2010s.
So what's happening in the in-between then? Is it what's going on there? You still playing with the band, or is it other bands kind of start to form now and you start to kind of perfect what you're doing?
So a few years after I was in Sadistic with this with my first band, I was friends with a lot of people around the Liverpool music scene. Maybe about 18 months to 2 years into it, I was good friends with Matty Jones, and everybody in Liverpool knows Matty Jones. And we had some similar music tastes. We'd been to a bunch of shows together, and we had loads of friends in common. So he was like, he said to me, he saw me in Crash Studios, which is where Sadistic used to practice, and he was like, so me and a bunch of guys, me and him, Harry from Obsolete at the time, a guy called Greg, and another guy called Chris. He was like, we're starting to do a band. We haven't really got a name. We've got a few ideas, but we want to do like tech death, and we want to do heavier stuff. And I know you're into that, and I know you're a bassist, and we need a bassist. So do you want to come along? And I was like, yep, I'll happily check it out. At the time, I didn't have a 5-string bass. I was still just playing a 4-string bass. I was playing pick style. And he was just like, we've got a couple of songs kind of like loosely put together. Come along to a jam. I'll lend you one of my my 5-string bass, because he was the guitarist for the band, but he also played bass. Right. And he said, come along to practice, and I was like, yep, sound. Yeah, I'd love to play a band like playing heavy material, because as I say, it's Sadistic. It wasn't necessarily the kind of music that I would listen to, but I enjoyed playing it.
Right.
But, so this other band presented me with the opportunity to play something that I was more of a fan of, and I was like, I thought it might give me an opportunity to also progress. So that band ended up developing into Neuroma.
Okay, all right, yeah.
Yeah, so then we started around 2006, I believe, maybe 2005, and the guys had a couple of the earlier tracks together. Dingo's Ain't My Baby, Portuguese Takeaway, Purple Rain. They had a couple of tracks kind of put together, and I came along, and it was a huge it was a massive jump for. It wasn't even a step. It was a leap and a bound to change from playing 4-string kind of tremolo picking kind of black metal to playing tech death with my fingers on a 5-string bass. Like it was I don't know what I'm doing. I feel like I had a bit of identity fraud.
We've probably got a lot of we certainly will have a lot of musicians listening to, and there'll be I imagine some bassists amongst them. Let's talk bass for a little bit. So in the first band, you're playing with a pick, and that facilitates being able to play fast to a lesser or greater degree. And then you move to the 5-string, and then move to playing with your fingers. Was that purely from a feel point of view, or was it a speed thing, or what did you want to do? What facilitated that move?
For me, it was the technicality. So the earlier Neuroma stuff, playing tech death and playing quite fast passages, I just couldn't do with a pick. I was never very good with a pick. I couldn't really alternate pick, and we didn't play particularly fast in Sadistic anyway. So to play some of the fast tech brutal death metal that Neuroma was doing, I was like, I can't hit all these notes with a pick, with a pick in my right hand. I'd be, over time, like I could do 2 fingers and 3 fingers, and then other techniques which I developed over time, over the years. Like I'm going to stand a better chance of being able to get definition out of the notes that I'm playing by switching to playing finger style, which is funny because I think now if I tried to go back and play a pick with pick style, I wouldn't know what I was doing. I'd probably drop the pick constantly.
It's interesting, isn't it? A lot of sort of the great bassists that people think of, a lot of them kind of, especially the metal thing, and obviously, Cliff is the one that springs to mind almost immediately, is all kind of preferred that sort of definition when they played, that didn't want to get lost in the mix and simply play root note stuff, to kind of explore a little bit. It's Rob got the job in Metallica. I firmly believe, apart from being great, but being, playing with his fingers, it's talked about a lot as being a kind of a real turning point for a bassist to make the switch from a pick to the fingers. It's like almost like a graduation. Did you find that when you were playing then that you felt as though you were moving up as a musician?
I definitely felt more capable. I felt like I was able to play the stuff that I wanted to play better, and during that period I progressed probably more as a musician than I have at any other point. So I'd probably Sadistic was our first kind of foray into playing music and trying to make noise and trying to just have fun with friends. And then Neuroma was like a step up, a little bit more serious, but the music, like the guys were really accomplished musicians. Like Matty and Harry really knew what they were doing.
Yeah, and that raised your game by extension then, yeah.
Yeah, so I kind of, it made me practice more, it made me work harder. It eventually led to me to get my own basses very quickly, obviously, because I don't want to always lend somebody else's bass. So I developed very quickly at that time just to keep up with the guys. I enjoyed spending the time with them. We enjoyed practicing together. We enjoyed the material, and it really helped me develop, understand bass better, understand heavy music better, the relationship between like what I'm playing, what they're playing, any interplay that we had. And me and Harry both had musical backgrounds, as in terms of studying. We knew like how to read, write, and play music. Matty didn't have that kind of background, but he was also a very good guitarist. He'd been playing for quite a number of years. So his writing style was very erratic, which made my kind of more refined, probably not a very good word to use, but kind of approach to how to write music develop to match him. So it was a very challenging time as a musician, as a bassist, but it led to like my fastest period of development.
Yeah, it's almost a crash course, isn't it? Because you've got to. Were you writing material as well alongside them, or were you kind of generating ideas, or were you more producing ideas, going, okay, that works, maybe let's do that twice and then this, or that type of thing?
So primarily the other guys were more involved with the writing elements of it all, and I would help more with the composition, where it was like, how do we go from this section into this section, and what can we do here? So I would kind of throw ideas in that way. So while I was developing my actual ability to play, I was slowly getting better at writing riffs and actually putting in musical ideas as opposed to simply compositional ideas. I've never been much of a musical composer. I'd say I'm still not really. I understand musical composition. I know how to put riffs together, but I'm not very good at writing actual music.
Right.
So I've quite often had more of a kind of supporting role when it comes to
almost helping produce. Yeah. So what did this translate to a live thing? Were the shows more aggressive? Were they bigger? What changed as a live sort of perspective with Neuroma?
So the first show that Neuroma played live was in Burnley. Actually, we played in Burnley before we played in Liverpool.
Right.
We'd recorded a demo with a few tracks, just rough. In the studio, which we put out, so we had some material for people to actually listen to. And then a friend of the band, Chris Butterworth, who's actually in Crepitation now, he at the time he was, and he still is, in fact, is still in Castrated. He was putting shows on in Burnley, and he put us on a show opening for Dawn of Chaos from Hartlepool and Dead Beyond Buried, who were from down south, London ways. And that was our first show, and we got a huge amount of feedback. Everybody was really impressed with us. We'd been practicing and writing for over a year. And we'd been at the point where we'd set up in Crash Studios like as if we were playing a show, and we would have rehearsals where we were playing as if we were playing a show. So then when we came to the stage, it wouldn't feel too alien. So we could really put on a good performance, and we got a lot of good feedback and a more kind of death metal, like purely death metal oriented crowd, because the people were there for a death metal show, and previously all the shows I'd played with Sadistic were kind of mixed bills, so there were like mixed bill half days, mixed bill all days, which do they are a great thing to have. It's great to have mixed bills, but that brings a mixed crowd, and you don't really get much of a crowd reaction because the crowd reacts differently to different bands. So when there's a mixed billing, you don't necessarily get a huge response. So this was my first time playing a death metal show with other death metal bands in a death metal crowd of people who were. And that was like, again, we got a huge amount of feedback. We got so much, from that. We got interest in other shows. People offered us other shows. We ended up doing our first ever official release with Dawn of Chaos, who we played that show with. The first split CD we did, Northern Discomfort, was a split with Dawn of Chaos, which came out at the back of that show, because they were so impressed with our live show and our material. They were really blown away by how solid we were and the music quality that we were putting out.
So at this point, are you kind of are you still working with promoters here? I'll tell you what I'm leading here. Are you kind of working with promoters? Are you even thinking about your own shows yet? Because in the background, I'm thinking that we'll get to Slam and stuff. We'll get to that in UK Slam soon. But I'm thinking, when were the seeds of that kind of started? And it sounds like at this point you kind of just still with the feelers out about bands and the scene and stuff, or were you kind of almost thinking we can do our own shows as well?
So it wasn't for a very long time. Actually, I think I may have done my own show while I was in Sadistic, before I'd even joined Neuroma. I just don't remember what years, because the original drummer for Sadistic was a guy called Pete Carroll. I've not spoken to him for a very long time. He left the band after not too long, but we did a show together in Zanzibar, and that was just so, because there wasn't a whole lot of opportunity. There was ones here and there, but we thought we'd put on something ourselves. We did I think it was, I believe we gave it the title of November to December. November to Dismember, or something along those lines. We put a show on there. Yeah. Tony, the old manager of, the old owner of Zanzibar, gave us. He allowed us to do the show at venue as long as we had a certain amount of people come through the door. Yeah. Paying £5 through the door, then the venue would be free. Yeah. So we got some of our friends' bands from the local area, but bands that we'd actually played with ourselves, bands that we had friends in, put a bit of a mixed bill together just to kind of put on a good event and get some good bands together. Being a musician yourself and being in bands yourself, you'll know that you'll meet a band and you'll be like, oh, we should play a show together sometime. So there was a lot of that in the early days. It's like, oh, it'd be good to play a show together.
That's just bear with me one of the things that the internet has gave us. That now, yes, you meet bands at a show and you talk and you go, okay, you play this and we play that. That makes sense. Let's do some kind of show together. But now bands can listen to your music online and then go, hey, we're based in Scotland or we're based in Edinburgh or whatever it may be. Why don't you come up to our show? And we'll come down to your show because we've already heard your band. That's probably one of the positive things about the metal community. There's an almost a kind of like social network, for want of a better word, where you can talk to other bands kind of like you would at a show. But before that, before the internet and Facebook exploded, you had to do that. You had to kind of talk to a band and go, hey, where do you live? Where are you based? Okay, and you kind of had to piece the show together yourself, like, and it was a wonderful organic time that we've lost that side of it, but I think we've maybe gained with the internet has meant that someone can go on and go, oh, there's this, like, you know, death metal band from Swindon. They can go and play this show somewhere else or whatever it may be. And now I think we've that's probably one of the more positive things I think that's come from the internet. That.
Yeah, it's getting the exposure to other bands around the country, and being able to just get that, you know, that first initiation, that first offer, that first kind of gig swap, getting to these other places and just meeting new people, playing to fresh ears and stuff.
So what's the next level then moving forward after Neuroma? What happened there, and how long did that go for?
So Neuroma was active for quite a few years. We'd in 2007 we released the Northern Comfort Split with Donna Chaos. We carried on playing a lot of shows around the country. Sadly, we never really made it out into Europe. It was an early band for a lot of us, so we didn't really know what we were doing outside of the rehearsal room. So a lot of it was, as you say, meeting bands, meeting people, meeting other promoters. Yeah, we had a pretty good reputation in the early days of always being that band who plays a show, but is always at the front for all the support bands.
Yeah.
So it was always like the Neuroma guys who were at the front headbanging and you know getting like cheering on like the support, like any other bands who were on the same show as us, whether they were on before or after us. We'd get there before doors opened. We'd never turn up halfway through a show, and we'd support all the other bands. So we had a good reputation for that. So we had a good relationship with other bands because they were always like, oh, thanks, you know, there was nobody else at the show, but you guys were at the front and stuff. Or there was like, or
there's an enormous amount to be said for that, isn't it? I mean, people, if you're a young band listening to this, and there will be some young metal bands who've just started out here now, I'm telling you now, even above the music, you should be good. Otherwise, why are you playing live? But you should be a good band anyway, or at least try to be good. But above that is how you are socially and how you act. If you turn up midway through a band set, or don't turn up at the sound check, or fuck around with other people's gear, or just generally a pain in the arse to be around, that will carry more weight than anything you could ever do. It just wrecks it. A band's that are great to work with. That's the first thing that gets you in a door most of the time. Just being a good to work with band who genuinely just turn, like you say, watch the band and get to the front and stuff and all that type of thing. That's way more important than even anything you play. Anything you play should be good, obviously, but how you interact with people at a show, certainly sound checking and that type of thing, hugely important. And it's one of the biggest things I tell the younger bands, that they have to get their fucking shit together, that you can't be a dickhead, because we're all in this together. It's meant to be a scene, for Christ's sake, you know.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. A lot of people are, you can rarely see the people who are out for it for themselves, or the people who are involved like in a scene where you become so entrenched in part of something, in part of, like I remember one show, Neuroma travelled up to Edinburgh for the first time, and we played a show which actually led on to my introduction to the guys from Cancerous Room before I joined them. Because we went up there to go and play a show with Ingested and Desecration, maybe Discarnate. And there was a few other bands on there, one called Psychoanalysis, which some of the members went on to become Party Cannon.
Oh yeah.
And we were up at the front. We were at the front of the show for every single for every band. We were drinking with every single band. We were talking to every single band, and we came away from that being like, nobody at that show, like we knew some of the people, but not too well. And we came away from that show, everybody knowing who we were, just because we had spoken to everybody, and people may not have even bothered ever listening to our band before, but they would know who we were, so we'd exchange kind of contact details, and they were like, oh, I believe you're in a death metal band, link me to your stuff, and then we'll try and get you up. So just building that relationship, they might not even know you're in a band or know what the level of your band is, and give you such an opportunity just by having that kind of friendly interaction with them. And that's something which I've found myself.
Incredibly important. Yeah, incredibly important.
Like I've some of the best bands that I booked, bands that I've worked with, bands that I've brought over from Europe or the other side of the world for my events in the past are the result of interactions that I've had with people, while I've had a few beers and we've had a laugh, and then about like, oh, so you're in a band, oh, that's cool, let's swap details and stuff, and I'll check out the band. I'll be like, oh yeah, cool, that's our help. And it's all based on, a friendly interaction, a good friendship, and something that builds from that. And as you say, I think a lot of that I'd like to say that it's not completely gone, but a lot of it is, sadly.
Yeah, it's almost like I brought this up on a previous show as well. It's almost like there's this kind of invisible fight for positions. Like if somehow your band does well, it's taking something from another band. It's bizarre. It's bizarre, this weird thing that goes on, and it's bizarre, this kind of pre-rock star thing that happens where people go, well, I have to act like a rock star and be kind of aloof and that type of thing in order to become one. And it's all bullshit. It's all fucking nonsense. I've been, grateful enough to work with some very, famous people and people who have been rock stars, and none of them are dicks during the sound check and load-ins and stuff and around other people. In fact, all the greatest people I've worked with have all been super nice and accommodating and that type of thing. It's incredibly important. So it's interesting that you say about kind of booking and stuff. How far are we away then from UK Slam Fest and stuff, and how far are we away from that?
So again, it's probably quite a while. The UK Slam Fest, it's as a name and a brand, that didn't actually begin till 2015. It was the first year that we ran UK Slam Fest. I'd done a couple of shows here and there. I booked a couple of shows in Basement 20, which is how I Basement 20 and the Pilgrim back in the day. I've done a bunch of shows there, but I'd never really thought of myself as a promoter. I was more just a facilitator.
Why did you do those first shows? What made you go, okay, I'm going to book my own show?
Similar to the November to Dismember show, it was friends, bands wanting to play together, and the need to have a show which filled in a date on a tour, and people needed the help. So I put on the first couple of shows. One of the early shows I did in Basement 20 was for Pighead, who was some guys who were met over in Germany when I was over there in 2009. I met those guys on a drunken night out, made friends, swapped details, and then eventually brought those guys over to do a little UK tour where I'd help them out and put them on in Basement 20, and spoke to friends that had other like kind of promoter friendships that I'd made to help them do their first little 4-date UK tour. So it was more just I never thought of myself as a promoter, somebody who wants to be a promoter and wants to post shows. I just wanted to help bands. So I wanted to help other people learn about bands that I enjoyed. I wanted to give bands opportunities to play. I wanted to bring friends bands from other parts of the UK to come to Liverpool to play to people in Liverpool in the metal scene, because I'd be saying to my friends, oh yeah, Neuroma or Sadistic played with this killer band from wherever that may be, and I'm going to bring them here so everybody in the city can then find out about them. They don't have much going on. They don't have a CD, they don't have an album, but they do have a couple of songs. Check them out. So it kind of developed from there, and then as time went by, more and more people were like, well, your show is pretty good, you know what you're doing. I remember I organised a show about 3 years ago for a band called Mare, and I had the guys from Just Turin playing, and this is Turin. There was Anti-Hero, who went on to become God Complex, and Corrupt Moral Alpha supporting. Corrupt Moral Alpha being from Southport ways. And I remember providing the rider, and the drummer of Corrupt Moral Alpha, Tom Dring, also from Vagrant Recordings, said to me, he was like, you can tell that you are in a band because you know what to provide bands on a rider. You know what you're doing. And that was really got quite a big poignant moment for me, because I thought, I've never thought of myself as a promoter, even though technically by organising shows I am the promoter. But that was the first time I realised that, I know what I'm doing because I came at it from a musician's point of view. I've been in bands where I've turned up at shows, and I know what I would expect to be there in terms of, what information I need, what's going to be provided, what is required to be provided. So I would always take it on, and I'd always take that kind of approach. And then over the years, people started to recognize that in me. So when I put on a show, regardless of the level of success of the show, the bands were always happy because they always were provided with all of the information that they needed. I always say communication is the absolute will be the biggest thing of success.
I raised this with Sal and said that, touring bands remember good promoters and good venues. They remember them. They really do. And they don't remember, the fact that there's loads of people watching a band or any of that, or how many people or how many tickets they sold or anything like that. They remember who did a good rider. They remember who had good showers. They remember who treated them well, who paid them when they got to the show, and all that type of stuff. And they remember them. And it honestly, even now when I look at a tour itinerary and I see a couple of venues, I think of the promoter. I think of the venue owners and stuff, the people that do the riders and the people that organise stuff, and the parking and things like that. I think about those things first, and that's what the touring cycle is born from, those places. So it's interesting you kind of say that you essentially just fell into it out of a need to want to get music out there, to provide a platform for people's bands and a place for people to go to watch said bands. Do you think we're maybe losing that, or are we still got that? I think I can certainly speak of I talked to Xander from Halfway Home and Promotions, and he definitely, that's his MO, to kind of produce a show. Are we maybe lacking some people in the community who are that passionate that they're going to go, okay, I'm going to put the show on myself?
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's why I've done it. Like over the last few years, I've been doing quite a few shows. It's now called Outpost. Previously, it was Maguire's.
Yeah.
And I was actually responsible or co-responsible for the first ever show at Maguire's Pizza and the last ever show at Maguire's before it changed its name to Outpost. Yeah. The first show was, which was an amazing story. Kind of, there's a guy called Kabir De Silva from Liverpool who puts on the occasional show. He's played in a few bands here and there, and he asked me for some assistance with a room which he'd found, because he had a gig book for some doom bands, which he was due to put on in the Pilgrim, but the venue was double booked. So he ended up finding a room next to his dad's thrift shop on Renshaw Street. So his dad owns I think it's 69A or 61A Renshaw, which is a thrift shop.
Right.
Next door to it, there was like a little small pizza bar. And he knew that there was a big empty room at the back of it. So we asked them if he could put a gig on there. And they were like, "Are you sure? It's a bit of a mess. It's just storage and stuff." And he was like, well, as long as you don't mind, then I'll do it. And then he spoke to me, and me and him went down there, cleared out a bunch of stuff. There was like old fridge freezers and a pool table, and there was like no PA system, but we managed to get a guy to come down with a PA system. We had to plug in the extension lead up to the flat upstairs because there was no plug sockets. There was no microphone stand, so we improvised and duct taped a microphone to a stepladder. And so it was like this, and we pulled down about 25, 30 people to this back room.
Yeah.
And it was all built out of the necessity of of providing said platform. It was meant to be in another place, but instead of just cancelling the show, we were like, nope, we'll find somewhere else, we'll do it somewhere else. And we did this kind of show in the back of this pizza bar. Yeah. Loads of people came down, loved the pizza, loved the fact they could get pizza and go and watch bands. And then obviously over time, the venue just kind of developed, got a permanent sound guy. Ian has got a permanent setup there. He's got a permanent setup there. I used to work with him for shows in Basement 20 and in the Pilgrim. And then we moved, I think for one reason after another, things moved to Maguire's. Now he's got a permanent setup there. The venue's got a little drum riser. It's got a smoke machine, it's got lights, it's got a fully fitted PA, it's got a laminate floor instead of a torn carpet. And it's developed massively. So it was all something like that was so organic, because it was like, we want to help friends. We want to put this show on. We want people to put music on for our friends to come and enjoy, because we are so involved in it. But it's not something which happens a lot anymore, but the likes of Xander and Halfway doing so many shows in the downstairs of the Jacaranda. I went to a show with Monasteries earlier in this year, and it was because the kind of genres that they're putting on aren't necessarily catered for in Liverpool. So they're like, well, instead of us just being like, oh, screw it, we'll go to Manchester or somewhere else for all the shows, they're like, we'll just do it ourselves.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a nice DIY aesthetic to it. It's just like, why should I not let these gigs happen when I can put them on, with a little effort in my own area?
Yeah. It's like, I love people forget, or maybe don't necessarily are aware that when a scene begins, kind of begins and becomes kind of like the beginnings of a scene, shall we say, when it kind of opens up, everybody benefits from it. So it's when kind of a group of musicians and a scene sort of becomes what it is, the people around it blossom as well. It's the old adage of a high tide raises all ships. So a good scene means that a venue gets more people in. Therefore, the venue sort of invests more in that music, gets better equipment, better functionality and what have you. And the venue itself spends money on the decor, spends money on the bar and that type of thing. And that thing improves as well. Then you get someone who can become a dedicated sound guy like Ian, who can hone his craft, learn and enjoy what he's doing. And he becomes swept up in it as well. And one of the reasons why music, and certainly live music, is so important is because of all the tributaries that river runs from. Do you know what I mean? So it's like all those sort of people's applications, like if you're a sound guy, if you do lights, or if you're a bar owner, or if you're a venue owner, all those things flourish with a good live scene. It's not just the music. It's not just the venue getting money. It's not just that. There's a wonderful blossoming that happens from the surrounding explosion, if you will. And we've lost that, I think, slightly, with people realizing that live music apparently can be replicated while just watching a video or watching something on a mobile phone. And in reality, going to a live show is you feeding that river, is you feeding that whole thing that blossoms, like I say, many people's careers. That's where people's first sound guys start. That's where people who crew or tech for someone or do backline stuff start at the local scene. It's not just the music, it's not just the musicians, it's the whole thing around it.
Yeah, absolutely. There's very few. There's probably only ever Kiss who started as a big band.
Yeah.
But every big band started as a small band playing to in local bars and pubs. All of the great names start somewhere. All of the big crew members, all of the big sound techs, all of the big
Everybody.
sparks, the light guys, the venues, the tour managers. Everybody starts somewhere, so it's nice to kind of be involved with the DIY element of it and be at that grassroots level on a lot of platforms.
So I mean, we're definitely, ladies and gentlemen, we're definitely going to get Joe back on the show, because Joe is like the epitome of a defender of the faith, as I often like to call these people in our community. And we'll definitely go into some of the other bands he's been in. We haven't even started with the bands that he's currently in, but you know what? We've gone an hour and a half. Look, I don't care how long this takes. We're going to get as much as we can in on this show, ladies and gentlemen. So right now, what band are you in now, and kind of where are you at now as a promoter?
So if we jump forward a little bit, I'm currently playing in Crepitation and Colpocleisis. Crepitation, I actually joined in 2009 while I was still in Neuroma. I joined them because Matty from Neuroma was playing in Crepitation. He'd been playing in them for maybe a year. Crepitation had started in 2005 in Manchester, and I probably had more lineup changes than Napalm Death over the years. But I remember I was at a Neuroma practice once, and Matthew came in 2009. He was like, "Oh, so Joe, you're going to Death Feast Open Air in Germany, aren't you?" I was like, "Yep." And he's like, "What?" I was like, "Why?" He's like, "Oh, you're going to play bass for Crepitation." I was like, "What?" So I was just like, "I'm happy to do that." And he'd switched from playing bass in Crepitation to playing guitar. So I then joined Crepitation. I've been in the band since. We had a bit of a break between 2010 and 2013, just because it was never really a full-time band for any of us. It was just a bit of a side. All of the members were in different bands. And I won't even open that can of worms. That's a huge family tree of bands.
Yeah.
That
reaches out. And the style of music, then, for someone listening, I would suggest checking out Crepitation most definitely. What sort of style are we kind of in now with that?
So
would you
that's
say?
kind of earlier Crepitation was like brutal slam death metal.
Mhm.
It was heavy, it was fast, but it was also heavily focused on slam riffs and groove riffs.
Mm.
And it always had the very silly kind of vocal approaches, silly logo. It always had a bit of a tongue-in-cheek kind of humorous aesthetic. It was a very English approach to death metal, I thought. There was a lot of nods towards the likes of Alan Partridge in the early days, and it was always just well, it still is just about having fun these days with the lineup changes and the members that are in the band now. We kind of play a little faster, more erratic, more hectic, and we kind of gave it the subgenre of we came up with the title of slamming brutal death grind, because it kind of encompasses all of the different facets of all the different members that we feel lead to the
Isn't
sound.
it interesting? When listening back to the Crepitation and stuff, isn't it interesting that you can have fun and have a comedic prose in a brutal band, in a death band? You can have that. People would sometimes say that that's something of a misnomer, that the two can't exist. But it's wonderful how it does. You go back to something like Lawnmower Death and stuff like that mixed comedic, almost Monty Python, comedic stuff going on within that. And I think that's very English, that, isn't it? It's a very British thing, that, I think. You don't really see an awful lot. You get some of it in Europe a little bit now. But I think that's quite something very unique to the English sort of death and slam scene. When they do stuff where they mix comedy, there's a wonderful comedic thing. You get everything like Raised by Owls and stuff and Footprints in the Custard. They've kind of pulled the comedy element into it, and metal doesn't get enough props for the comedic and tongue-in-cheek stuff that we do, where we look at ourselves and do that. I don't think it gets enough props.
Yeah, totally. I remember, like, in the early Neuroma days, like, a lot of our songs were we used to cite Brass Eye as our biggest influence, as opposed to any bands. We'd say that we are a Brass Eye themed band almost, because we were always talking about all the crazy shit we see on the news and all this stuff. But we took a kind of pun. All of our songs were pun titles, like Gash in the Attic or Semi-Skimmed MILF and stuff like that. We always played around with words and had a lot of fun with it, and then Crepitation took it to another level. But there was always jokes whenever there was something happening in the world. It was like, right, which band's going to get on this kind of thing which has happened in the UK first? Is it going to be Neuroma? Is it going to be Castrated? Is it going to be Fetal Juice? And I think Fetal Juice are the absolute masters when it comes to puns and comedy. When it comes to death metal, without going to the kind of, as you say, Monty Python lengths of the likes of Raised by Owls, who are comic geniuses.
Metal seems ripe for parody, and the reason why I believe metal is so strong is because it realizes the ridiculousness of some of the stuff that's out there and some of the stuff that it's done in its history, and can immediately turn it on its head. And it's like, I'm always very enamored by someone who doesn't take themselves very seriously, if you know what I mean, allows them to be like someone to make fun of them in a light way. I'm always very, for me, that shows a very balanced person. They're comfortable enough with themselves that someone can take the mick and it's fine. And I love that metal can do that. Metal is probably one of the most misunderstood genres, certainly the heavier end of its ability to mock itself, and like Fetal Juice is a perfect example of that, knows all the stuff that's gone before and ridiculous titles of death songs and stuff like that, and switched it all on its head. I think it's beautiful when that happens. You get bands like Evil Scarecrow that are very knowingly, that they are ascending up something, but they're doing it with an earnestness. I love that. Like, I think it's fabulous.
Yeah, it's all about taking ownership. It's all about making it yourself and being true to yourself, because people, especially in the metal scene, have got a good eye and a good ear for somebody when they're bullshitting. And when people are trying to be over serious, people can be a bit like, I'm not really buying it. You can't buy into it. But if people who've got a sense of humor show that they've got a sense of humor, it comes across more earnest, and people can buy into it then. So people find it more funny. So when the likes of Fetal Juice, especially their ex-vocalist Sammy, always had a way with words when introducing songs, that people would instantly know that he found it funny, so you found it funny. So it kind of again gave you that bond with the band. You were able to interact with the element of humor in all of it.
What's interesting as well is when it backdoors heavy music, and by that I mean that the band does something ridiculous or amusing or whatever it may be, but the riff contained within there is fucking savage, and it kind of always backdoors the riff in, you know, and you kind of, oh shit, they're fucking heavy as well, like, you know.
Yeah, you get the best of both.
Exactly. So, Crepitation, so at this, when did you start? Did you start to tour outside of the UK with Crepitation?
So my first ever show with Crepitation was Death Feast Open Air, which was.
Oh, you did say, sorry, yeah, you say, so that's a bit of weight there, because that's a very well respected thing. You're going into a band, you know, almost cold. Was that tough? Like.
Oh yeah, it was very tough, and the worst part was that we played that show. It was a terrible show. We didn't play very well at all. The band had been going for a while, but I'd not actually met all of the band members at the time, and I'd never had a rehearsal with them. So I learned the whole band set basically in Matty's bedroom, and a couple of run-throughs like straight after a neuroma practice. So I'd learn everything like that. I turned up, met the drummer for the first time, and met the one of the vocalists for the first time. Introduced myself, and then we went. You know, we were ready to go on stage then. So we had a bit of an issue where we ended up playing a different slot on a different day. Okay. I won't really go into the details on that, but a certain member of the band didn't turn up. Wow. So we were well prepared, but then we weren't very well prepared, and then it caused some sound issues, and we played terribly. But it was still a massive experience. We ended up playing to like a few thousand people, and it was mind blowing for me.
Yeah, that's going to be like that's you real deep end stuff, both musically having to play with a band you've not played before and what have you, but also at this time. What year are we talking here now? Then.
So that was 2009.
So around the sort of, you know, midways through of 2000s. There's an explosion of sort of this type of thing in Europe, most definitely, isn't there?
Yeah, there's some of the festivals over there were getting bigger and bigger. So the likes of Mountains of Death, NRW Death Fest, Death Feast Open Air, Obscene Extreme. These festivals were really starting to get a lot of.
I remember seeing
a lot of traction.
Extreme and being like, "This is ridiculous." It was huge.
But funnily, that was the second show I ever played with Crepitation, because we played later that same year at Obscene Extreme at 3:00 in the morning. We were the second to last band of the festival, and that was another like momentous occasion to find all of these. Like, it was a big introduction to like the power violence, grindcore, hardcore punk kind of stuff, which I hadn't really fully experienced or explored before.
Europe was kind of mixing it up really well, wasn't it? It was mixing all those hardcore crossover elements. It was mixing in death and kind of that thing, and there was a wonderful schism. It was a wonderful sort of mixing pot in Europe where people were just trying all kinds of crazy stuff. There's some really great stuff happening.
Yeah, it was a really, really good, like, amazing time of innovation musically. A lot of bands really starting to, smaller bands making a like headway for themselves. So it was amazing to see and to be part of that as well.
Yeah, because at this point now we're having the sort of shift with the internet and stuff and things like that, and music becoming more available. And you get someone like Bathory, who previously was difficult to get hold of music, or previously admonished for political views or whatever, is now becoming available and getting heard, and is injecting itself into what bands are doing. And you find there's, like I say, a wonderful mixing pot of stuff happening, probably because of the internet and the availability of music.
That's certainly how I found out a lot about a lot of these festivals, a lot about a lot of bands and stuff through like the rise of MySpace, especially, which gave you an instant access social media platform to go and listen to a sample or a song of a band, and then somebody would recommend something, or you'd hear a song on somebody's profile. And the amount of bands I just discovered just through, like, I discovered Aborted through them having a song on somebody else's profile on MySpace, and I was like, who's this? Why is this blaring at me through the speakers? And I was like, oh, it was amazing. I think it was Hecatomb, the song which was playing at the time, and I was like, wow. So that's like hearing those bands through like new bands which I hadn't heard before. Previously, I'd heard them as we've discussed already, but also from the likes of like the Drilling the Vein, Roadrunner Records, music videos and stuff like that. Yeah. So like to actually get more into the death metal world and hear about all of these bands.
For me as well, it was like it was interesting to like you say, about record labels. Like there was stuff like Nuclear Blast and things like that. I kind of went to them and all the bands that they looked after, and that kind of helped me get into a lot of acts as well. There was a lot of great stuff going on there, nearly a days of Roadrunner and what have you. But these were fantastic bands.
Century Media.
Yeah, Century Media particularly. Like, there was some great stuff coming from Caskets as well. And it was just this wonderful thing of like record labels specifying in particular sort of groups of music, which I really enjoyed, which we most definitely lost a little bit of that now. So what you're in Crepitation as well as being in am I pronouncing it right? Colpocleisis?
Yeah, Colpocleisis.
Colpocleisis, there you go.
Yes, so I'm currently in Colpocleisis as well. So I was good friends with the members of Colpo. They actually just started as a three-piece. Steve Moses, the guitarist, started the band, but after hearing the likes of Cephalotripsy and these three-piece slam bands, and he just wanted to play something really aggressive, really heavy, really slammy, really kind of just knucklehead riffs. And I joined them. I played one show with them at a Mosh Against Cancer event in Liverpool in the Magnet, just as they were playing a fairly big, reputable show. And I thought, I'll learn the stuff and I'll play with you guys. So it kind of bolster the sound a little bit. And I didn't really think much about it. And then they were like, oh, do you want to play bass on the album? And I was like, well, yeah, sure. And at the time I was in Neuroma. I was in Cancerous Womb, but Cancerous Womb were actually coming towards an end. So I was thinking, I was feeling Cancerous Womb might call it a day. So I might join Colpocleisis full time. So I ended up joining them. And also recording their first full album as well, Fallopian Fallout. So I recorded the album, joined the band, and just got announced as a full-time member of that. So both bands have been fairly active in parallel since then, as well as anything else that I've been doing.
There are some out there that would suggest that you can't be in multiple bands because it's required to have multiple headspaces. Now, I've gone and talked about this a lot on previous shows. I think that's nonsense. I think you can be in as many bands as you want to be into. It doesn't really matter. But how do you differentiate with the bands and stuff? Do you have different roles within each band? Do you write differently for each band? What changes?
So the way that it's fell with these two bands, with Crepitation and Colpocleisis, because I've been in Crepitation for so long, the lineup that we've got now, I'm kind of running with the vast majority of the composition, which is funny after saying earlier I'm not much of a composer, but I've definitely built up my chops over that through studying music to an academic level and through all my kind of history and activities with bands over the years. So I've taken the forefront for writing for Crepitation at the moment, and the irony and part of the humorous, incestuous element of the UK death metal scene is that both Colpocleisis and Crepitation share a guitarist and bassist now in myself and Steve Moses.
Right.
So Steve is largely the composer for Colpocleisis. He wrote with the drummer, the ex-drummer Carl. He wrote the first full album, Fallopian Fallout. So I didn't actually have any composition input on that other than any kind of bass that I added to it. So when I joined the band, Colpocleisis have written new songs together since I joined the band, where I've had some input, but I usually give my ideas to Steve, who'll then make them more Colpo sounding. And now the way that me and Steve work, he'll introduce riffs to me for Crepitation, and I'll make it more Crep sounding. So that way we can kind of introduce each other's ideas. Sometimes we'll before the lockdown, we were both having quite regular writing sessions where we'd just come up with riffs, and we'd be sitting there trying to play a really crazy tech riff for a Colpocleisis song, and then one of us would be like, hang on a minute, wrong band. Save this riff, let's record it, or let's film ourselves playing it, but we're going to put it in the other band because it fits musically with the other one. On the very base level of how to keep things separate is we play in different tunings.
Okay,
So Crepitation will be in B standard and Colpocleisis will be in G sharp standard. So we have different instruments. So I'll have two basses. Yeah, I've got two basses. He's got two guitars. I think he's got more than two guitars.
Yeah.
but well, I've set up one guitar for each band, so we know what kind of what kind of approach we've got, what bass we've got, what guitar we've got, what tuning we're in. So
have you had to pull double duty live yet?
We've done it a few times. The last show that we played before the lockdown was in Moscow in Russia, where both bands played. So we both had to do double duty. We've done it a couple of times now, and I'd actually done it previously with Neuroma and Crepitation on some shows, and Neuroma and Cancerous Room on some shows. I just like being on stage, really.
I love that when I go to there's been a couple of death metal shows I've been to, and I watch the changeover, and two of the guys don't do anything because they're on the next band.
Yeah, they'll just come off, go and get a drink, and then come on.
Yeah, although I did see one guy just change his T-shirt, and I thought, fair play.
Yeah. Just so it looks different for the photographer.
Just so it looks different on the photos. It's all right. So you talk about the lockdown, and we can't not talk about it because it's so, it's so prevalent in what we're doing. Is it affecting the writing? Is it affecting what you do as a musician?
So it's been a bit strange. So obviously it affects how the band is writing because we can all write individually, but we can't really write together and bounce out ideas off each other as we would in a rehearsal room. So obviously me and Steve haven't been in the studio together to actually have writing sessions. Just at the beginning of the lockdown, I bought myself an interface so I could actually record and try and make some demos at home. So for the first 2 weeks, I've actually been off on lockdown now for 9 weeks. My girlfriend was ill before lockdown, right. And she was made to stay at home, and because of my career, because of my job, they said that I wasn't allowed to also go and work because she was unwell. So I had a couple of weeks off without being able to work from home. Which I was trying to be I was like, right, I'm going to be off work. I'm going to be super productive, and I was at first. I was able to do some. I wrote 3 songs for Crepitation, or at least put riffs together, which kind of roughly resembled a song, and was able to use the interface board to kind of record a rough bass kind of playthrough of the song. So I wrote up all the music and tabbed it up and sent it to the guys to actually look into. But it's hard for our bands to really practice together because a lot of the ideas are simply just ideas until we jam them together.
It's the exploration of those ideas that can't happen in an isolated environment, isn't it? It's the you can write a riff and stuff, and you can put that together and have various sections to a song. But there's a wonderful thing that happens when those group of musicians get into a room, and the push and pull of back and forth irons that riff out. You can't get that remotely. You just can't. You can string stuff together and you can play with someone else over the internet and via cameras and stuff, but you'll never get that immediacy of you playing something and reacting to someone else playing something. Also, someone playing something wrong. So say you're playing and you hit the wrong note, but it somehow works, or it goes in a different way, or that kind of whole jamming aspect of it is lost in isolation, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. Because you don't, the audio quality of what you're hearing is different. What you can see is different. If you're playing and watching each other's instruments, you kind of miss those things. But there's always happy mistakes where you play a riff wrong, but it actually sounds good, or there's a different movement that the bass does, which the guitar doesn't do, which sounds good. Yeah. And it's all these happy accidents.
Well, I remember there's 2 songs that I was listening to recently, and the stories behind them are interesting. The first one was Beyond the Realms of Death by Judas Priest, and that initial riff or collection of notes was played by Les Binks, I believe, who's a drummer, just while he was sitting around in the studio, and they were like, that's good, that's a song. Also, Suicide Solution by Ozzy, Randy was playing that whilst he was practicing, warming up, and Ozzy goes, that's a riff, and he's like, what? And he's like, no, that's a riff. And that becomes a riff. Those moments can only happen when a group of musicians gather, isn't it? It can't happen any other way.
Yeah, it's funny you mention those, but I've had similar occasions in the past. As you'll know from when a band's on stage and you do a line check or a sound check, and you go for all the individual instruments, there was always a riff that I used to play with Neuroma, just something which was never part of a song, but kind of filled out what was needed from a sound check.
Yeah.
And so I used to play that, and over time we kind of introduced it to being one of the riffs for Gash in the Attic. So that riff from just something which we built up, one of the guys in practice was like, "What's that riff you're always playing in soundcheck? It's not one of our songs." So no, it's not. It's this. And we're like, "Oh, well, let's make that into a riff."
Exactly.
And on a similar note of like writing music, for just over a year I was working at a hotel in the city centre, and I'd work night shifts, and the night shifts were really quiet. I'd be busy up until midnight, and then I was quiet then until 5 a.m. or so. Besides the occasional, late night person coming in to check into the hotel or whatever, and I was actually writing music while I was in work, but without an instrument.
Yeah.
And I had all these little notepads with all of these riff ideas and rhythm ideas written down.
Yeah.
And I'd go to practice, or I'd come home and I'd write it out. And there's a couple of songs for Crepitation, which were on the Worldwide Slamicide split, which I'd composed the entire song without actually having an instrument. Because I was just playing beats with my hands, or I just on a desk, or I had ideas about rhythms that I wanted to do, or kind of putting structures together. And I was looking automatically. I visualize shapes a lot, and I put a lot of like mathematical thinking into music. So I was thinking of how to write music while I had downtime, but without necessarily being musical about it. Yeah. So there's a song called Placenta Dispenser, which the opening riff is completely based on my mobile number.
I love it.
So I wrote the first half of a riff, and it's obviously in 11/8 times time signature, because it's a telephone number is in 11 digits long. Yeah. So I composed that, and then when I got to playing it on an actual bass, the stretches between notes were too long, and it just didn't make sense. So then I had to transpose it down so I could play it across 2 strings, which made it make more sense. And then I remember going to practice with the guys, be like, right, I've written this song, but I've never played it before. And you're like, what? And I was like, all right, here's all the tabs. Like, and I will teach you guys it while I'm learning it myself. Wow. And then they were like, I was trying to teach them this 11/8 riff, and they were like, "Joe, we're in a death metal band where we don't we can't figure this out. Like, what are you trying to say?" And I was like, "Right, let me play it through. This is how we do it." So it's kind of just trying to take that composition element, trying to do what you can with your time. To like everything I do seems to kind of revolve or come back to music in some way.
It seems like, Joe, it seems like music is just entrenched in you, and no matter what you do, it's going to come out in some shape or form. So when we kind of come out of this ridiculous sort of situation we are, because of a pandemic, we already had a whole bunch of challenges, and that you'll be more than aware of, and our listeners will be more than aware of, facing the live music scene and metal as well. Obviously, they all kind of get put to the side now, because we're going to face a whole load of new challenges as we come out of this. Like, I'm reading only today that, they're going to not allow kind of moshing. They're not going to allow kind of stage diving, well, they didn't really do much of that anyway. But kind of crowd surfing and all that stuff, they're going to kind of stop that as well. What are your kind of thoughts on what's going to change?
It's a difficult one. I'm not too sure how much will actually change, because I think that there will. I can see that maybe there'll be a bit of a security presence at larger venues, but I think it'll almost have a American Prohibition kind of effect on gigs, that people will be craving, mosh pits, craving the energy, craving that. So there'll be all of these events which will kind of pop up in these like smaller venues that will be kind of, like, as I say, this prohibition, this speakeasy kind of, mosh easy, if you will, these places that people can go and do these things until there's a time where they say that that it's kind of publicly allowed. It'll be strange to see how it's policed, to see if it's actually policed at all, or how they're going to actually manage it all. But I can't imagine that there'll be.
It's interesting that you talk about like kind of the prohibition side of things, and one of the analogies I could probably give, or the metaphors I can give, is when like they invented the car. a lot of people said that it was the thing that saved horses. Horses would have been, kind of, almost kind of, put away, put to pasture, if you will. But it kind of saved them, and then people only rode horses for the enjoyment of it, if you will, because a car existed. And it's almost that kind of whole thing about you don't miss something until it's gone. Maybe because of this, people realize just how precious that is. And like you say, there is an explosion of people going to venues and mosh pits and seeing live music. And we can only hope that carries over and translates into venues springing up and scenes springing up from this. Like all the way through human history, all the moments of great adversity has always produced some of the best art and some of the best music, is through adversity. To give it a metal context, we always talk about Birmingham and Judas Priest and Sabbath coming from Birmingham and born out of, incredible strife and poverty and that type of thing. And it was born from that, we can only hope that when we come out of this sort of pandemic, that the problems that it's created will force us to kind of really reassess and embrace music as a whole. I don't know. I hope that that's the case.
I certainly think so. From what I've seen on social media, people have spoken to, everybody's at home, everybody's trying to be as musically productive as possible. And I think that by the time lockdown's lifted, people are going to be itching to go and perform this, for more people to hear it. Bands are going to be coming back. I think next year is going to might actually be overbearing in many ways, especially with all the cancellations being rescheduled. There's going to be so many.
That's the thing that I'm interested in seeing how it plays out, is that, people are all saying, okay, we're just going to cancel the 2020 tour and we're going to make it 2021, or we're just going to move this festival and now it's going to take place here. I get that, but there's only so much space, right? It's like, you can't just move everything into 1 year and bunch it up into 1 year. It's not going to work like that. So it's going to be almost overloaded, in many ways. I suppose one of my other concerns, I don't know how you feel about this, is that what about the venues we're going to lose before we get back to, in inverted commas, normal? The venues that will close in this interim time now and won't reopen again.
It's hard to say. Like I've seen, and I'm more than aware of quite a few venues which are struggling, which are trying to raise money to pay for various costs during the closure period. So it's kind of hard to say and really have much of an idea of what's going to happen going ahead. There's it's a sad loss to a lot of venues, but I think that with the loss of a lot of venues, people will start looking in alternative places. If we lose a large percentage of venues which host live music, people are going to look elsewhere. It won't be the end of live music. It'll just be a bit of an obstacle, and people will find these new places and start putting shows on in.
About on a couple of shows ago, I was talking that we thought that the next sort of paradigm shift in music would have happened from the next Nirvana or CDs becoming replacing vinyl. I thought that the next sort of shift would take place on that or would be a format thing essentially. But it seems like that this virus has sped up the next phase of what live music will look like.
Yeah, with the live streaming of shows, it's been insane. It's like a lot of the pre-existing platforms like Bands in Town now give you the option to update and to announce a show, but announce as a live stream, and they quickly adapted to that. And I think a lot of platforms are making these adaptations to keep themselves still relevant, to keep everything ticking along, but also to give bands that outlet, because bands need that outlet, and they need to keep up their appearances, they need to keep up their output, and they need to stay in touch with the fans, and the fans want to see what's going on with these bands. What are these bands doing when it's quiet? What about that show that they cancelled, which I'm not going to get to see, but I get to see a live stream of? So that's certainly a huge change. I don't know if it's something which will stay in place. It would be nice to an extent, but I'd like to think that people don't necessarily rely on it.
I put forward a couple of ideas with it. One of them being that you pay for the live stream, but that means that you get a ticket to a live show for free to kind of run alongside streaming and the live experience. I put that forward as well. Some people have took up that and started to do that as well. So I think this will just reshape the scene. I don't think it will destroy it. I think it will reshape it. But unfortunately, there will be casualties along the way, sadly, I believe. And that's probably the real shame of it. But maybe necessary in order for us to come back stronger, which is almost feels like a terrible thing to say, but, come back stronger from, something that most of us in our lifetime would have never faced, anything even close to this.
Yes, certainly. I think it's going to be a massive change. It'll be a very interesting journey to see what happens, to see what people do, to see how people react. But I think with our previous discussions about promoters and the DIY aesthetic for providing a platform, people will always find a new way to a new place to put on music. That if something closes, that somewhere else will open up, or they'll just find a way to do it. A new building, a new space. All you need for music to exist is a space and the equipment to actually create music. So if you've got the space, the power, and the electricity, and the actual the PA system to produce music, then you'll be fine. Like people will always find a platform.
Metal is the dandelion that springs from the concrete.
Yes,
it just finds a way. Some people see them as weeds. I don't. They're still as pretty as all the other flowers. Joe, we've done over 2 hours. We haven't even started. We've done over 2 hours. We'll definitely get, ladies and gentlemen, we'll definitely get Joe back on the show because, and what we'll also do is we'll make sure that we've got Joe on speed dial if we ever are in a pub quiz with any relating question to metal, because I'm pretty sure Joe's going to know it. What's the next things for you then? What are you working on now? What's going to be the next things for yourself?
So a little bit of what I've been doing during lockdown, as I say, I bought an interface and I've been practicing my music tech skills. So over 2 weekends I recorded an entire album on bass for a band called Awaken the Misogynist, which is a international project of several different people who've never met before, from China, from Nepal, from the United States, from Switzerland, and me from the UK, from various other members of other death metal bands around the world. They already had a full album written, and they brought me on board to record the album. So I learned the entire album, and I've recorded it over 2 weekends at home. So they're currently in the mixing process for a little 3-track EP while they work more on the album. But I've kind of recorded all my parts. I've given that to them. And we're just kind of letting that flow. It's nothing that we need to really push because it's not something which is ever going to be taken live. But it's just a fun project to work with some other people. As far as my bands are concerned, Crepitation and Colpocleisis, I was very busy at the beginning, but I've kind of slacked a little bit. So I've just been focusing on my own my own musical education for a little while. So I've written some Crepitation songs. I've written towards some Colpocleisis songs. Both bands are working towards their second full-length albums. Some are further along than the other, but it'll be nice after lockdown to kind of get all of those, back in the studio and to try and all share our ideas. And all the members of both bands are brimming with ideas and brimming with input, so it's going to be a very kind of musical renaissance moment when we're all back together to kind of really discuss all of this, really kind of exchange all the ideas, all the things that we've kind of discovered and since we all last saw each other. In the meantime, I've been working through I've been practicing a lot of my own techniques, trying to improve a bit of self-improvement. I've been working through Alex Webster from Cannibal Corpse's bass book, Extreme Metal Bass, trying to develop some techniques, trying to just improve my own ability. So the bands are quiet for now, but they will be busy again in the future.
Any thoughts on promoting some shows?
So I've spoken with the guys at Outpost, and as soon as the lockdown's lifted, I'd definitely like to get together with them, put a show on, just to kind of get everybody back out again. As far as promoting shows, obviously we've not really gone into detail, maybe another time, but with UK Slamfest, we did have the 2020 edition booked in Manchester in September. We're not too sure on what the future is for that at the moment. We are going to wait until the end of the month, and then the whole team's going to have a bit of a video call and discuss it all to see what we want to do going forward with that. Kind of depends on the climate of the political climate, the economic climate, and the viral climate, if you will, to see what we're going to do with that going forward. But as far as booking shows, I'm not really looking to book many shows or really book much going on, much commit to anything at the moment. It's just the climate's just not really accommodating for it. And all of the shows that both bands had have either been cancelled or postponed to later in the year. So at the moment, we're just kind of keeping with them, and we're focusing on all of the band admin stuff, the behind the scenes stuff, the writing, trying to help boost our own profile a little bit. Do all of the stuff that we don't normally have time to do when we're touring or playing shows.
Fantastic. There'll be a ton of musicians now listening to that and going, fucking hell, Joe thinks he's done fuck all. He's done fucking loads. You seem like been crazy productive, and it seems like that would have happened even if there hadn't been a lockdown. It seems like, ladies and gentlemen, Joe is very much a defender of the faith and very much someone who has the metal within inside him, and whatever way he can, it's going to come out, either promoting, playing in bands, writing, and he just seems to be kind of just as excited about it as he was when he first kind of started in a band, and I think that's fantastic, Joe. I think that's something that, a lot of people will listen to this and get a lot of inspiration from and find, really, really positive, which is something that often maybe death metal and that type of thing doesn't really get its props that it should do. I think a lot of people will go, shit, I really need to get my shit together, listen to what Joe's doing. He's in several bands and writing a ton of shit. It's amazing. So, thanks again for coming on the show. Well, ladies and gentlemen, Joe Mortimer.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me, and hope to catch you again. One thing I would just like to say on the back of that, though, is that being productive isn't necessarily the best way to operate your time at the moment, because of such such a time of uncertainty and lack of clarity, and people concerned about physical health, mental health, the economy and stuff. That while I was able to be productive for the beginning of the lockdown, my productivity slowed down. But one thing which I've noticed is the amount of social media, the amount of people, the amount of influencers out there who are saying that this is now the time to be productive. This is the time to make the best out of you. And I think people really need to focus on that. It's maybe not the best time to be productive. It works for some people. It doesn't work for others. But people certainly shouldn't feel the pressure on themselves that there's a lot of people talking about to try and better themselves, because people are right now best doing the thing which is best for them. Sometimes daily, that might be the best thing for me today is to have a day on the sofa and relax and watch a movie and maybe have a beer or something. All the days that you might wake up super full of passion and motivation, and you want to just get out your guitar, your bass, your instrument, whatever you do, your pen, your paintbrush, and you just want to be super productive that way. But as happy as I am with the level of productivity I've had, I'd just like to say that it's definitely not it's not something I'd say.
The job one is to simply survive it, to simply get to the end of this process, and whatever the next process is. And like you say, some days, Joe's 100% right. People that will be listening to this will be like, Christ, Joe's done a lot. He has. But that's because he's rode the waves of when he wanted to do those things. Like Joe said, I'm sure there's been moments where he's like, you know what, I don't feel that I can do this now. I'm going to have it down on the couch. I'm the same. People may look and go, wow, he's doing this, he's doing that, or whatever. But some days are hard, some days are tough, and some days simply getting through is enough. And knowing that means that when those creative spurts happen and those moments kind of happen, they seem there's a lot more potency to them, rather than sitting there going, today I have to be productive. It's much better to go, I want to be productive, Yeah, I think that's
exactly that's the point which I really want to drive home, is that it needs to be organic. There's if you sit there and from 6 p.m. till 8 p.m. every day you're sitting down because you're going to do something musical or you're going to do something productive, then you're probably going to actually do the complete opposite, and you're probably going to get yourself in such a tiz. You're going to get yourself in a really full of writer's block, and nothing works, and you hate everything, and then you don't do it again for the next few days because you're in such a mood with it. The best way is to just ride, learn to understand yourself and ride those emotions, ride that wave while we're in this period of uncertainty. That would be my advice to everybody going forward. If you can be productive, great. If you're not productive, that's just as good.
What a beautiful way to end this. Not only is Joe a super, bassist and superb musician and an advocate of metal in his local scene. He's also a really nice guy. That's fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, Joseph Mortimer, thanks for coming on the show.
My pleasure, mate. Good to chat to you.
Great chatting to Joe there. Really, just a great outlook, really positive. The future of metal in our local community and our local scene is very much in safe hands with him involved. Really going to get him in again because we didn't cover anywhere near what we should have covered with the UK Slamfest and that's a massive conversation as well. And quite a few times I had to stop from going off on mad tangents because this would have been 3, 4, 5 hour long conversation. So we'll definitely get Joe back. I hope you enjoyed this show. This show was suggested by a listener that we should do this, and that's what I want you to do. Suggest people that I should be talking to. Who wants to come on the show? What do you want to talk about? What are these issues that we need to look at, examine, and help move forward? Once again, see you at the show. I don't know when that's going to be, guys, but it's got to be soon, right? I don't think we're allowed to mosh when we get there, but I think we're pretty sure we're going to have a live scene when we return. We will. I guarantee this, and I promise I will see you at the show.